As the train left Copenhagen Central Station, Henrik Borg set down his briefcase and cooled his forehead on the windowpane. He always did so at the precise moment when the platform began to glide away. He closed his eyes and let the receding lights from the station flicker across his face. For years, Borg had taken the last train home from the office. He always sat at the far end of the last carriage, which left him with only a short distance to walk at the other end. Tonight was like any other in all respects but one. Borg had been persuaded by a colleague to join a drinks party and had indulged in not one but 2 large glasses of beer. There was a smile on his lips. His wife always said that he should be more adventurous, and now he had been, and it had passed off very well. Borg was not drunk exactly, but relaxed and at peace with the world. The carriage was warm and gently vibrating. Borg liked the train. Not that he had to take public transport. Borg had done well for himself. He could afford to drive a Mercedes to and from work. There was a parking space for each of the partners at the office, but Borg preferred the train because it was predictable. Nothing stopped it, herring through the dark as the people of the suburbs lay fast asleep. The last passengers in his carriage got out at Hellerup. He could relax for the next half hour. No one was likely to embark before his stop. Borg closed his eyes, feeling the train gently oscillating. The motion set him in mind of galloping across the plains of the Wild West like the cowboys of his boyhood picture books. Within minutes he was fast asleep, cantering through a cartoon landscape of cacti and stone formations. Afterwards, the first thing he became aware of was the cold, then the utter silence. Last of all, before he opened his eyes, he felt a light on his face. This was odd, because it was completely dark all around him. As his eyes got used to the gloom, Borg saw trees and bushes outside the window next to him. He got up and walked over to the other window and saw more trees further away. He looked at his watch. He had been asleep for nearly an hour, so the train must have been to Helsingor already. He fumbled for his phone, grateful when his hand finally closed around the smooth pebble. But there was no power left on it. He always charged the phone before he left the office, but of course tonight he had gone out instead of working. Now Borg was frightened. Something had happened, and he was unable to call for help. With some difficulty, he managed to open the door by pulling the emergency handle. His legs trembled as he emerged onto a narrow tarmac platform and almost buckled under him when he saw that the rest of the train had gone. There was the outline of a shelter on the platform and a post with a sign, but the name had faded and was illegible in the dark. It looked like a disused station, perhaps now deployed as a siding by the railway company. His carriage had somehow become detached from the rest of the train and left there. If only he had never drunk those beers, he would not have fallen asleep on the train. He never had before in all his life, and now look what had happened. A movement at the far end of the platform startled him. It was a man slowly walking away, pushing a bicycle. A bell tingled faintly as he went, and there was a bright light bouncing from the front. Borg was relieved. He soon caught up with the man. "Thank God, there's someone else here. I fell asleep. Where are we?" The man shot him a look, more weary than unfriendly. He said nothing in reply. "Do you know this place?" Borg said, trying to keep his voice even. "Can you tell me where I might find a phone?" The man shrugged. He started walking, but not as fast as he could be. After a moment, he stopped, his face half turned. "You want me to follow you?" Borg said, guessing that the man might be foreign or speech-impaired. The man nodded once and began to walk again, this time without stopping. Borg decided it would be better to follow than remain at the siding alone. They walked towards a handsome white manor house, standing at the end of a long, straight drive bordered by trees. As they got nearer, Borg could see outbuildings and what looked like stables. Up close, from the cobbled courtyard, the house looked even more impressive. Honey-coloured light streamed from several windows. Borg was lifted by the sight. He happily followed the silent man through the front door. It clanged shut behind them. The vast, high-ceilinged entrance hall was a surprise. Borg was certain he had never seen anything so beautiful. There were trees and palms and plants everywhere, growing from large brass pots scattered about the floor, and hanging from the ceiling and perched on stands, dozens of bird cages full of budgerigars. The sound of loud voices made him turn. 2 old women had entered the room, obviously roused out of bed. They wore dressing gowns, and their long silvery hair hung loose over their shoulders. Then he realized that the women's faces were identical. "Joachim!" exclaimed one of the twins, clapping her hands. "Who have you got for us this time?" "Yes," said the other, stepping up close. "What are you?" Borg felt confused. He looked from one face to the other. I'm a lawyer," he stammered. "Oh," said the first twin, her smile fading. "Oh dear," said the other with a frown. "We already have 3 of those. Do you not cook or butcher or keep bees? We need a beekeeper desperately." "Now look," said Borg, trying to muster his most authoritative voice. "My name is Henrik Borg. I am a highly esteemed solicitor, a partner of Borg, Wiesner and Bundgaard. Something unfortunate happened. I fell asleep on the train to Helsingor and woke up in a siding where your good man here found me. May I please borrow your phone?" "Oh, we don't have a telephone," said one of the twins, "but we always welcome lost travellers." "I'm Andrea von Traun," said the other, "and this is my sister Dorothea. You'll be very comfortable here with us. Everyone always is." Borg was astounded. "You mean I'm not the first person this has happened to?" "Goodness, no," said the first twin. "Though it has been over a year," said the other. "That's why we're so excited." Borg counted his options. The only thing he could think of was walking to the nearest house with a phone. In the dark and cold, this would not be pleasant. Besides, by the time he got a taxi, it would be halfway through the night. "Now," said one of the women, "we have a bedroom ready for you. Joachim here will take you there and make sure that you have everything you need. And then we will see about things in the morning," said the other. Yes, thought Borg. Why not? A bed for the night in the house of these eccentric old sisters. His room was large, if somewhat fusty, with its mahogany bedstead and heavy brocades. A window overlooked the back of the property, but it was too dark to see anything. Before he left, Joachim, who was obviously some sort of factotum in the household, pointed to a tray with a glass of hot milk and a couple of rusks. He hesitated in the doorway, his eyes resting on Borg's for a few seconds. Then he was gone. Borg sat on the bed in his underwear and socks. He drank the milk and nibbled on the rusks. His mother had always given him rusks when he was little and under the weather. Their sweetness, mixed with the thick milk, was oddly comforting to Borg. He had no trouble sleeping. In fact, he was out cold as soon as he had wiggled under the heavy eiderdown. He woke with a leaden head. The sun hurt his eyes. There were voices whispering next to his bed. "I agree with you, dear Andrea. He is not a muscular man, and perhaps a little disappointing all round. There are plenty of good uses for him." "All right, Dorothea, if you think so. We'll put him to weeding the rose beds and then see." Borg sat up with a start. Judging by the bright light, it was midday already. He looked for his watch. It was gone, as were his clothes and his briefcase. The sisters, now dressed austerely in black dresses with their hair scraped back into tight buns, stared at him with patient curiosity. There were bundles of keys dangling from their waistbands. "What is this?" yelled Borg. "Where are my—" But he halted abruptly, for a sharp bolt of pain had taken his breath away. It came from his neck. There was a metal collar there, fastened tightly with a padlock. "Why are you—" Again, he was halted by a searing pain. He noticed Joachim standing by the door. He was working a set of switches on a small box with an antenna, which looked very much like a remote control device. There, Henrik," said one of the sisters. "Everyone is like that at first. You'll soon get used to speaking only when asked." Borg leapt out of bed, wondering if they would stop him from moving, but they didn't seem to mind him crossing the floor. He looked out of the window at vast kitchen gardens, and beyond them fields with sheep and cows. He could also see a hen run, a pigsty, and an orchard with flowering fruit trees. Everywhere there were people working, perhaps 24 or more. No one spoke. Borg heard a jangle of keys as the sisters came up behind him. "It was our father's farm, but after he died it became too much for us. Then one night Joachim arrived, just like you did, from the old station. It only took a small amount of persuasion to make him stay," one of them said. "It was Joachim who thought of the collars. He used to be a science professor," said the other. "By the way, if you attempt to cross the boundary, you'll get a nasty shock. But there's no need for you to worry about that now." Helplessly, Borg followed the sweep of her wrinkled hand. He would have said that he wasn't much good at gardening, or anything else remotely practical for that matter, but he was too frightened to speak, and dared only shake his head a little. "Think of it as an exchange," said the other sister. "You help us, we help you." The twins moved in close on either side of Borg. Together, the three of them looked down at the ordered beds, pens, and enclosures, where men and women moved about with all the single-minded busyness of ants. "Each day the same, no changes and no surprises. What more could you possibly want, Henrik?" said one sister, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You will like it, we assure you," said the other. "Everyone does. Eventually." The man lay on his back, his slippered feet resting casually on the threshold. One hand clutched a pipe, the other the evening paper. Were it not for his open eyes and the dark mess on his chest, you would almost think him napping. Gently, Viggo Jensen unpinned the crime scene photograph, leaving a pale rectangle on the wall. He placed it on top of the papers he had already stowed in the cardboard box with his chipped coffee mug and spare tie. Then he switched off his angle-poised lamp and walked over to the window. He teased open the blinds with 2 fingers and looked outside. She was still there, the woman on the opposite corner, wrapped up in a thick coat and a headscarf. Since 5 at least she had been standing there, well back from the light, stamping her feet and hugging herself against the cold. From the way she kept looking across at the main entrance, Viggo supposed she was waiting for some arrested man to be released. No matter. It was not a night to be standing on pavements. It was the last week of January, and Copenhagen was freezing. Leif Heinemann had been shot on a winter's night, cut down on his front doorstep. Because he was a middle-aged bachelor with no living relatives, no one complained when police eventually had to abandon the case. Yet, to Viggo's mind, the moment captured in the photograph had never passed. Heinemann was still lying on the parquet floor, his vacant eyes pointed at the ceiling, the pipe warm in his hand. He had asked everyone to stand back. If you looked closely enough at the scene of a murder, the motive announced itself. But this was different. No sign of a struggle or vengeful anger, just a single bullet to the heart. Why? What had Heinemann done? This ordinary man who kept to himself and never hurt a fly. For 28 years, Viggo had tried to answer that question. Some would say that it had obsessed him, to the point at which he was neglecting his other cases. It had not exactly helped his career. He rubbed his face hard, tried to force Heinemann from his mind. He had turned every stone, looked at the case from every angle, and found nothing at all. He looked outside again. The woman had gone, and now the street was empty. Heinemann had not been robbed, nor was there any evidence of him owing money. On the contrary, for a civil servant on a modest income, he had a healthy bank balance. On the day of the murder, he had left work at 5 and walked home as usual. After supper, he had settled down with his coffee and the paper. At 8:10, a neighbour had heard the shot and rushed out to find him already dead. Heinemann's flat was unremarkable. Except in the lounge, they had found a good telescope, along with several books on stars and planets. It was an obvious hobby for someone with hours to while away. Reluctantly, he picked up his cardboard box and looked around the office one last time. The sound of his mobile startled him. It was Birgit from the switchboard, only a year away from retirement herself. A woman called Gertrud Gunnarsson said she wanted to make a statement. What sort of statement? She refused to say, except that it's very important. The name didn't mean anything to Viggo. Tell her to come in. I did, but apparently there is something she needs to show you. And she did ask for you personally. It's out at Frederiksberg. To be honest, I'm a little curious to hear what it's all about. I wouldn't get your hopes up, said Viggo. It's most likely nothing. There was no outward sign of an incident at the 5-story apartment block where Gertrud Gunnarsson lived. With a sinking heart, Viggo began to suspect that she was one of the deranged people who reported crimes that had never happened. But the woman was surprisingly normal, leaving him with even less of a clue as to why she had asked for him. Around 60, she was trim and well-dressed with reading glasses hanging from a string of beads around her neck. I was just about to have some coffee. Join me? While she busied herself in the kitchen, Viggo looked out of the living room window. He knew this part of Frederiksberg well. In fact, it was only a handful of streets away that Heinemann had been shot all those years ago. From where he was standing, Viggo could see several blocks of flats with brightly lit windows. Above the roofline, the sky was full of stars. He remembered reading that some of them were long dead, only so far away that their light had taken tens of thousands of years to reach Earth. It was like looking into the past. Gertrud Gunnarsson startled him, appearing suddenly at his side. You were lost in thought. Oh, I was just thinking that January is a good month for looking at the stars. She smiled knowingly. You can speak plainly here, Inspector. You were thinking of the man who was shot dead in this neighbourhood many years ago, whose killer was never found. Am I right? Viggo was astonished. You knew Leif Heinemann? No, he was a total stranger to me. But I gather that the case was a personal disappointment for you. I am sorry about that. She pointed to a newspaper cutting on the coffee table. Viggo recognized it immediately. It was an article from a few days before announcing his imminent retirement from the police force. The journalist had dwelled on his connection to the Heinemann case and called it his one notable failure. "It says today is your last day, so I waited for you outside the police yard. When it got late, I thought I had missed you, so I went home and phoned instead." "Ah," said Viggo, "it was you." "Oh, you saw me?" She laughed. "I thought I was being discreet." Viggo was starting to think that Gertrude Gunnarsson was mad after all, but Viggo felt a sting of unease at the way she held his gaze. "When I was younger," she began, "when my husband was still alive, I taught the piano. Are you married, Inspector?" "No." "But you may know that after a while a marriage can become predictable." Viggo nodded, though he had no idea what she was aiming at. "Well, one of my pupils was a young man. Very young, Inspector. He came for his lessons when my husband was at work." "I see." "The first letter was a shock. Not the money, you understand, but the idea that someone... I suspected my pupil, of course, but he had just as much to lose as I did." "Blackmail?" She nodded. "The money had to be left in the backyard in an old piece of pipe behind the bins." "You did that?" "For a while, yes. Until one day I bumped into someone just as I was about to leave my envelope in the pipe. I assumed he was the blackmailer. He thought I was. We were angry. It took a while before we realized that we were both victims." "And this man, was he someone you knew?" She nodded. "He was a neighbour down on the second floor. He never told us directly, but I am fairly certain he used to dress up in his wife's underwear." "Us? There were more of you?" "6, as it turned out, all here in number 34, all receiving the same kind of letters." "That's a lot of secrets." Gertrude Gunnarsson shrugged. "Everyone has secrets. Haven't you, Inspector?" Viggo blushed, ignoring her inquisitive glare. "So, what did you do?" "We had a meeting here in my flat. Everyone agreed that we would not put up with it any more. It took a long time because we had to wait for the next demand to arrive, but when it did, we took turns watching out for the blackmailer to collect his money. Then we followed him home." "Him?" "It was a man." "Come," she said, "now I need to show you something." She took him to a small spare bedroom at the back of the flat. The room was only big enough for an upright piano against one wall and a single bed against the other. It smelt unused. Viggo looked out of the window, his gut turning. Through a gap in a tall row of trees opposite, he could see an apartment block. It was quite some distance away, but he recognized it well enough. Gertrude Gunnarsson followed his gaze. "I knew you'd understand once you got here. You see, we're not overlooked as such, so one doesn't expect to be seen. Except if someone—" "He never did look at the stars," Viggo heard himself say. "He might have done to start with," she said, "but he soon moved on to something much more interesting." "You shot him," said Viggo. "Yes, we drew lots. Someone gave me the gun, the others kept watch. It was over in minutes. Then we all went back to our lives. My husband and I lived happily together until he died." Instinctively, Viggo looked around for something to defend himself with. He was alone with the killer. Yet he sensed no threat. Gertrude Gunnarsson's peaceful expression suggested that whatever passion had driven her all those years ago was extinguished. "Why now? Why not own up sooner?" he said. "Because I wasn't sorry. Everyone was better off with Leif Heinemann gone. But you, that newspaper article, I am not a heartless woman. It's obvious that the case has been on your mind all these years. I wanted to tell you so that you shouldn't waste your retirement wondering. Heinemann wasn't worth that." "And the others? What do they have to say about it?" "4 have died, and 1 is senile, living in a home where no one pays any attention to anything she says. We're the only 2 who know." "And how can you be sure that I won't arrest you now?" "I can't. But I think you'd agree that it wouldn't serve any purpose." "Apart from justice?" "Justice is a big word, Inspector." They went through to Gertrude Gunnarsson's small entrance hall. Viggo picked up his cardboard box. Then he looked at his watch. It was 2 minutes past midnight. He was no longer a policeman. He opened the front door without another word and left Gertrude Gunnarsson standing on her front doorstep. He couldn't tell with his back turned, but he got the feeling she was smiling. When he reached the street, his phone rang. It was Birgit from the switchboard. "Oh, good," she said. "I just have to know, what was it all about?" Viggo closed his eyes. Actually, he thought, Birgit was wrong. There were things in life that you were better off not knowing. "What was what all about?" he said, reaching into the cardboard box and taking out the picture of Heinemann's corpse. He looked at it briefly before bending down and pushing it through the grill of a drain hole. "Well, the statement, of course, that woman who asked for you." "Oh, that," said Viggo, picking up pace as he rounded a corner and headed for home at last. "Just as I thought. It was nothing. Nothing at all." Every day, as he started up between the tall, straight lime trees to Amalieholm, Magnus Hansen began spontaneously to whistle. Though he would only admit it to himself, the Baroque castle, nestled like a cube of sugar in the green and brown fields of North Zealand, induced in him a sense of proprietorship. Magnus knew every inch of Amalieholm, from its hot, dusty attics to the flagstone floor of its kitchen, worn smooth by generations of servant feet. He could put a name to all the 378 portraits on the walls. Magnus disliked members of the public with their rucksacks and grubby hands. No matter how often he told them not to, they always tried to touch things or stray outside the red runner that protected the floors from their dirty shoes. Magnus preferred the quiet days when he would wander Amalieholm on his own, seek out an empty wing, and step over the rope partitions to lie in one of the 4-poster beds. Listening to the castle fountains and the peacocks crying in the woods, he would imagine himself a well-fed baron, surrounded by the riches of his seat. Until, invariably, the present would intrude, announcing itself with a scratch from his walkie-talkie, or the sound of another coach-load of tourists approaching from the main road. Magnus could conduct castle tours in his sleep. He had a mind for dates and an intricate knowledge of aristocratic life, 18th century antiques and agricultural implements, which made it all the more disappointing that visitors only ever wanted to hear about the Wailing Girl, allegedly the ghost of a young maid who was drowned in the moat by a nobleman after giving birth to his child. The guides were supposed to mention that to this day the maid could be heard crying in the corridors at night. But Magnus rarely bothered. He did not believe in ghosts, nor had he ever seen or heard one at Amalieholm, wailing or otherwise. Ghosts, in his opinion, were invented by the owners of castles with leaking roofs, mindful that most people would only pay for history if it came coated in blood and gore. His own business was with the physical world, with bricks and mortar, French clocks, priceless tapestries, oriental screens and marble fireplaces. The way the light slanted through the deep window recesses like buttermilk. Magnus did not mix with his colleagues, students mostly, whose tours he considered vastly inferior to his own. After work, his black uniform with red lapels and shiny buttons smelled of Amalieholm. Its sweet exotic woods, chalky walls and heavy brocades. When he closed his eyes and pressed his nose to the fabric, it was almost as though he were there. By chance, Magnus had overheard something that he could not stop thinking about. The castle's present occupier, Baroness Feltenbohr, kept a small apartment in the east wing, but she was 95, and after her, no one wanted to live there. With most of the farmland sold off and no prospect of making money other than from tourism, Magnus guessed that the younger Feltenbohrs preferred their modern homes in Copenhagen to the castle. Once the Baroness died, the estate would pass to a trust, which would have to employ a live-in caretaker, or so Magnus had pieced together. He could see no reason why the caretaker should not be him. Magnus had never liked old Baroness Feltenbohr. Miss Karin, as she insisted on being addressed, had an irritating habit of springing up during his tours. As he and his group of visitors entered a new room, suddenly there she would be, draped in a sofa or standing by a window, a dramatic tableau that made everyone gasp. Miss Karin, dressed to the nines and leaning dramatically on a stick, would then hold forth on the wailing girl, while the visitors listened with all the rapt attention they had denied to Magnus. The Baroness was sprightly for her age, annoyingly so. Magnus began to fantasize about her death, until, little by little, an inspired idea formed in his mind. It was more difficult than he had thought to recruit an accomplice. In the end, Magnus settled on a young waitress who worked at a cafe around the corner from his flat. From the loud conversations she conducted on her mobile phone, he knew that she was an unemployed actress and struggled for money. "I have a role for you. It is unusual, but it is acting all the same," he said to her one day when the cafe was empty. At first she was sceptical, but when he had passed her a brown envelope with 20 large notes inside it, she became more attentive. "Miss Karin, the old Baroness, is a dear friend of mine and likes a practical joke," he lied. "All you have to do is to turn up at the castle at 1 a.m. on Sunday morning. You will find the back door left on the latch." As for the job itself, he left that to her thespian talent and whatever imagination she could bring to bear on the part. It was best, as he explained, if he knew as little as possible about it. "Is it not illegal?" the waitress asked, but by the way her eyes kept sliding to the brown envelope, Magnus could tell that the money had done its work. As he left the cafe, he chuckled to himself, imagining Miss Karin's face, confronted at last with the fictional spectre with which she had entertained legions of visitors to Amalieholm. His plan was to stay away and simply turn up for work on the Monday morning, then watch with studied somberness as the corpse of the Baroness was carried out under a vivid orange blanket. But as the afternoon sun began to fade over Amalieholm on the Saturday afternoon, he found it impossible to resist witnessing the performance for himself. He had paid good money for it. Besides, it would allow him to spend his first night at the castle. Seeing as he was going to live there, it was about time. At night, Amalieholm felt different. Each creak and snap of woodwork amplified in the dark. Magnus had forgotten that he would not be able to switch on any lights. He carried a small torch as part of his uniform, but it was too weak to make much difference. He chose a guest room in the north wing, near enough to Miss Karin's quarters to make it up for a front-line seat. It smelled of mildew and cold cinders. He decided against the bed, lest it creaked, instead choosing an armchair facing the door. For a while he tried to sit in complete darkness, but the room's full-length portrait of the 18th-century Baron Otto Feltenbohr disconcerted him. The only way he could stand it was if he kept the torchlight pointed at the Baron's face. It was not long before he felt ravenously hungry, as he had not eaten since lunch. For a while he contemplated tiptoeing down to the staff kitchen to look for a biscuit or an apple, but that would be far too risky. Eventually he fell asleep, drooling on his hand. It was the crying that woke him. It had its own rhythm, at first piercing, then unravelling into a series of small sobs. By the direction of the sound, it came from the west wing. Magnus frowned, an interesting choice to start at the other end of the house, if a little unnecessary. He checked his watch. She was early. It had only just turned midnight, but that was all right. Miss Currin would have retired a while ago. By now she would just be opening her eyes, straining to hear the sound that had woken her. As the wailing grew louder, another sound mixed in with it, which he could not place at first. Doors, he thought, as the sound approached him, doors being opened and shut, and urgent running footsteps in between. Of course, the waitress would have done her research, a mother looking desperately for the child that was taken from her by an evil nobleman, or so the tale went. She was good. Very good. Though, as the steps and the banging and the wailing neared his own room, Magnus thought that perhaps she was going a little too far. Even he was starting to feel uneasy. He could not very well call out unless he wanted to reveal his presence to Miss Currin. Instead, he fumbled with a torch, intending to signal to the girl that she could skip his room, but the torch would not work. He must have forgotten to switch it off earlier when he fell asleep. Too late, he wished that he had stayed at home after all. The girl's wailing really was extraordinarily realistic, not just grief-stricken, but furious with it, the kind of fury that demanded release, a roar that was more animal than human. It occurred to him that he ought to get up, perhaps hide, but all he could do was sit there, frozen to his seat, and covering his face like a small child who thought this might make him invisible. Listening to the last few steps outside was sheer agony, though he knew that the girl was only doing what he had asked her to. When finally his door was flung open, it was as if from a sudden gust of wind and not by any hand. In the confusion of the blast and the wailing, he saw nothing but a streak of something grey that looked like moonlight. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the door was slammed shut, and the spectacle moved on, like a terrifying train, toward the east wing. There was nothing on the news about Miss Currin on the Sunday, but then the death of an old baroness from a stroke was hardly the stuff of headlines. It was more disappointing when he arrived to work on the Monday to find no outward sign of disturbance or upset. Despite the drama of Saturday night, it seemed nothing whatever had happened. Later, Magnus was astonished to come across the Baroness herself in the morning room arranging a bouquet of chrysanthemums to the delight of his gormless group of visitors. "Tell us, Baroness," he said, exasperated after waiting for her to finish her usual tale about the wailing girl, "have you ever heard this ghost yourself?" "Alas, no," said Miss Currin. A disappointed murmur spread in the room. The old Baroness smiled. "But then I wouldn't have. You see, I am stone deaf. Once I remove my hearing aid for the night, you could walk a marching band through this castle and I would not hear it." The visitors laughed. Magnus felt his cheeks glow. He had not thought about that. Next time he would have to be a lot more imaginative. Then Miss Currin's look grew serious. "Which is why there's a problem. As you see, I'm not long for the world, but, beautiful though it is, none of my heirs are willing to live at Amalieholm because of the wailing girl. It won't be easy finding a caretaker who will stay for more than a few nights." Magnus was just about to say that actually he'd be happy to oblige if the Baroness would do the honours and pass on, that as a matter of fact he did not believe a word of all this nonsense about a wailing girl. But at that moment one of his colleagues entered the room. He passed Magnus an envelope. "A young woman told me to give you this." Magnus stuck his hand inside, finding first the crisp stack of banknotes that he had given to the waitress, then a folded note. He pulled it out. The message was extremely brief. "I couldn't do it. Sorry." Distorted and faint, as if through glass or a long twisted pipe, he heard the voice of Miss Karin. "My dear man, are you all right? Quickly, someone, do something. Mr. Hansen! Mr. Hansen!"